My mom spent years telling everyone I was a lazy, ungrateful daughter. But when she lost the house I secretly paid for, she came crawling back, begging for my help. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Madison Reed. I'm 29 years old and work as an accountant in a small Ohio firm. I've always been the quiet, responsible type, the one who handles things behind the scenes. My family, on the other hand, is loud, dramatic, and full of comparisons. My mother, Sharon, is at the center of it all. She loves attention, loves to look perfect in front of others, and loves to remind everyone how much she sacrificed for her children. But behind closed doors, things are very different. She constantly criticizes me. She says I don't do enough, that I'm lazy, that I'll never be as successful as my older brother, Ethan. She calls him her pride and joy. He could make the smallest effort, and she'd shower him with praise. I could work 2 jobs, pay my own rent, and still she'd find a reason to call me a disappointment. I used to think maybe if I just kept helping, she'd see how much I cared. So I did everything I could. I visited on weekends, fixed small things around the house, and even sent her money when she said she was short on bills. She always accepted the help, but never acknowledged where it came from. She'd tell her friends that Ethan helped her, or that she managed things on her own. It used to sting, but I told myself, it's fine, she's just proud. My dad wasn't really in the picture much. He'd gotten used to letting mom run things. If she wanted something, he'd stay out of it. I think part of him was just tired of fighting her. Ethan, of course, sided with her in everything. He had a wife, kids, and a nice house in the suburbs. To them, I was the single sister still figuring her life out. But the truth was, I was the one quietly keeping things together. I knew my parents were behind on their mortgage, and I couldn't stand the thought of them losing their home. So, without telling anyone, I started making payments directly through my account. Month after month, year after year, I paid what I could. I didn't expect thanks, just peace. Then one afternoon, I stopped by the house and overheard my mom on the phone. She was laughing with one of her friends, saying, "Madison? Oh please, that girl's lazy. If I waited for her to do something, we'd be living under a bridge." I stood there frozen, hearing her words echo through me. After everything I'd done, that's what she thought of me. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. And one day, she'd learn that the lazy daughter she mocked was the reason she even had a roof over her head. After college, I worked 2 jobs to stay on top of my own bills and still help my parents with theirs. My main job was at an accounting firm, and on weekends, I took extra freelance work just to make sure my parents didn't lose their house. Mom liked to tell everyone she was financially independent, so I kept my help quiet. She didn't want anyone to know I was the one paying for things, and honestly, I didn't want another argument. The mortgage wasn't the only thing I helped with. When my dad needed dental surgery, I paid half the bill. When the roof started leaking, I sent money for repairs. When property taxes came due, I covered the shortfall without saying a word. I did it because I wanted them to be okay. I didn't do it for recognition or praise. I just thought maybe one day Mom would see I wasn't useless. But she never did. In fact, she acted like she was the one holding everything together. At family gatherings, she'd tell stories about how hard she worked to keep the house. She'd smile at everyone and say things like, "Some people talk about helping, but I do it all myself." Everyone would nod, and I'd just sit there quietly, biting my tongue. Then came the dinners where she turned me into the family joke. She'd say, "Madison's still figuring things out. You know her, she's a dreamer who never follows through." My brother Ethan would laugh and add something like, "Yeah, she's always working, but where's all that money going? Probably to those fancy coffees she likes." They'd all laugh, and I'd force a smile, even though it burned inside. I lived in a small apartment, nothing special, and drove an old car that rattled when it hit 50. It wasn't because I couldn't afford better. It was because every spare dollar I had went toward them. But Mom didn't care. To her, my life was proof that I hadn't made it. I told myself it didn't matter, that family came first. I repeated it like a prayer every time I felt humiliated. I convinced myself that being quiet was better than starting a fight. But over time, that quiet started to feel heavy. I'd go home after those dinners and just sit in my car, staring at the steering wheel, trying not to cry. I started realizing that no matter how much I gave, my mother would always see me as less. She needed me to stay small so she could feel big. Every insult, every dismissive laugh chipped away at me, and the worst part was that I let it. Still, I kept helping. I told myself things would get better, that one day she'd appreciate me. But deep down, I was starting to understand something I didn't want to admit. Mom didn't want help. She wanted control. And I was the easiest one to control because I cared too much. Thanksgiving at my parents' house had always been stressful, but that year it felt worse than usual. I almost didn't go, but part of me still wanted to believe things could be normal. When I walked in, Mom was already busy bragging about Ethan's promotion, telling everyone how proud she was of him. I smiled and tried to stay quiet, helping set the table and pretending everything was fine. Dinner started off polite, but as usual, it didn't take long for Mom to turn the conversation toward me. She started talking about how some people waste their potential. Everyone at the table knew who she meant. Then she said it, loud enough for everyone to hear. Madison will never make it in life. She's too lazy, too sensitive, and always looking for pity. The room went silent. I could feel my face burning, but I stayed calm. I told her that wasn't fair, that I worked hard every day. She laughed and said, "Oh please, you're just jealous of your brother. You always have been." Ethan didn't say a word. He just looked down at his plate. Something inside me cracked. I wasn't angry in the way I expected. It was more like everything inside me went quiet. I realized I'd spent years trying to prove myself to someone who would never see me for who I was. So instead of fighting, I just stood up, said I wasn't feeling well, and left. I drove home in silence that night, gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands hurt. I thought about all the times I'd covered for her, all the bills I'd paid, all the humiliation I'd swallowed. None of it mattered. To her, I'd always be the lazy one. That night, I made my decision. I wasn't going to yell or confront her. I wasn't going to beg for her respect anymore. I just stopped. I logged into my bank account and canceled the automatic payments I'd been making toward her mortgage. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone. I just let it go. It felt strange at first, like walking away from something I'd built with my own hands. But for once, I was doing something for myself. I didn't owe her an explanation. She'd made it clear what she thought of me, and I was finally ready to believe her, to let her live with the reality she'd created. Weeks went by, and Mom didn't even notice. She was too busy gossiping with her friends, probably telling them how I'd stormed out because I couldn't handle the truth. She had no idea the payments had stopped. No idea that the house she was so proud of was now her responsibility again. For the first time in years, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I wasn't begging for approval. I was just done, and I knew the day would come when she'd finally notice. 3 months passed without a single word from my mother about that Thanksgiving night. I went back to my routine, working, saving, and finally focusing on my own life. Then one morning, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox. It was a foreclosure notice for my parents' house. Even though the letter was addressed to Sharon Reed, I knew exactly what it meant. The payments I'd stopped making had finally caught up to her. For a long moment, I just stared at the paper. Part of me felt a heavy sadness, but another part of me felt something close to relief. I had carried that house for years, and now the truth was finally going to surface. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was shaky, something I'd never heard before. "Maddie," she said quickly, "we have a problem. The bank made a mistake. They're saying we're behind on the mortgage." I could hear the panic in her voice, but I stayed calm. I simply said, "That's strange, Mom. I thought you managed everything on your own. Remember how you always said I was too lazy to understand all that paperwork?" There was silence on the other end. She tried to laugh it off, saying, "Oh, don't be silly. I just need a little help sorting this out. You know how confusing these things can be." I told her I was busy with work and didn't have time to get involved. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just repeated her own words back to her, the ones she'd used to humiliate me for years. "Sorry, Mom. I'm too lazy to deal with that kind of thing." Then I hung up. Over the next few weeks, she called several more times, her tone switching from polite to desperate. Sometimes she'd act sweet, pretending everything was fine. Other times she'd snap, saying, "You're really going to let your own mother lose her house?" I didn't respond. I'd spent too many years being manipulated by guilt. This time I was done. Eventually she called Ethan. I know because he called me the next day, frustrated. "Mom's a mess," he said. "She's blaming everyone but herself. She wants me to cover her payments, but I told her no. She's the one who spent too much money trying to impress people. That made me pause. Hearing my brother, the one she always defended, refused to help her told me things were changing. Her perfect image, the one she'd spent years showing the world, was falling apart. Soon after, I started hearing from family friends. They mentioned Mom seemed off lately, worried all the time. I just nodded and said I hoped she figured things out. Deep down, I knew she was finally facing the consequences of her lies. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was closure, the quiet kind that comes when the truth finally does its own work. It was a rainy Saturday morning when I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened it, I froze. My mother stood there, soaked from the rain, her hair messy, her eyes red and swollen from crying. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked smaller, weaker, like the woman who always carried herself with pride and control had finally broken. "Maddie," she said, her voice trembling. "Please." I didn't know where else to go. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and she came in. She stood in my small living room, clutching her purse like it was the only thing she had left. I could see her hands shaking. Then she said it. "They're taking my house, Maddie. The bank is really doing it this time. I tried to fix it, but it's too late." I didn't move. I just watched her. For years, this woman had called me lazy, useless, ungrateful. And now she was standing in my apartment, begging me for help. Every word she'd ever thrown at me came back in that moment. Every time she'd laughed at me, every time she'd humiliated me in front of others, every time she'd said I'd never make it. She started crying harder. "You're my daughter," she said through tears. "You can't just let me lose my home. You owe me that much." I finally spoke, but my voice was calm, almost cold. "Oh, you. I've already paid more than you ever knew, Mom. That house was standing because of me." She looked up, confused. "What are you talking about?" I shook my head. "It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I have my own bills to pay now. I can't keep fixing your mistakes." Her face twisted with anger and embarrassment. "So you're just going to let me be homeless?" I met her eyes. "You could try asking Ethan. He's the successful one, remember?" The second his name left my mouth, her expression changed. I knew she already had. Her lips tightened, and she looked down at the floor. Ethan had said no, and it killed her pride to admit it. "I raised you," she said weakly. "After everything I've done for you." I let out a small, tired laugh. "Everything you've done for me? You mean the insults? The lies? The way you made me feel like I'd never be enough?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at the floor, like the reality of what she'd done was finally hitting her. I wanted to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't. Not after all the years I'd spent trying to earn her love. When she finally left, she didn't look back. I watched her walk down the hallway, her shoulders slumped, her pride gone. For the first time in my life, I didn't chase after her. I just closed the door and let the silence fill the room. A few weeks after my mother showed up at my door, word started to spread around town about the foreclosure. People who once admired her started whispering behind her back. Mom had always been proud of her image. She loved being seen as the strong, independent woman who could handle everything on her own. Now that image was falling apart. At first, she tried to hide it. She told her friends that the bank made a mistake or that my dad had forgotten to send a payment. But the truth has a way of finding its way out. One afternoon, Ethan's wife, Kelly, was having coffee with a few of Mom's friends. Trying to sound casual, she mentioned how I had helped pay for my parents' house for years. She thought everyone already knew. They didn't. It didn't take long before the story spread everywhere. People started asking questions. "Wait, Madison was the one helping with the mortgage? All this time?" Suddenly, the same friends Mom used to brag to were looking at her differently. They saw through the stories, through all her talk about independence and hard work. She wasn't the self-sufficient woman she'd always claimed to be. She was the one who'd let her daughter carry her burden while insulting her in public. It didn't take long for Mom to find out what people were saying. She called me first, her voice sharp and furious. "What did you tell them, Madison?" she demanded. "Everyone's saying you were paying my bills. You made me look like a fool." I didn't answer right away. I could hear her pacing on the other end, her voice growing louder. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me? I've worked my whole life to earn people's respect, and now they think I've been lying." Finally, I said, "I didn't tell anyone, Mom. You did this to yourself. Maybe if you hadn't pretended to be someone you're not, there wouldn't be anything to hide." She snapped back. "You've ruined my reputation." That's when I said it, calm and steady. "Mom, You did that yourself when you called me lazy." For a long moment, she didn't speak. I could hear her breathing heavily, struggling to find the right words. She tried to twist it again, saying, "I only said those things to push you to do better." I sighed. "No, you said them because you liked having someone to look down on. But that's not my role anymore." She hung up without another word. After that, things got quiet. Her friends stopped visiting, and even at church, people avoided eye contact with her. The gossip had done what I never could. It forced her to face the truth. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I hadn't ruined anything. I had just stepped back long enough for her lies to collapse on their own. And maybe that was the only kind of justice that ever really worked for someone like her. The house was finally sold at auction a few weeks later. It happened quietly, without ceremony or warning. The home where I'd grown up, the one I'd secretly paid for over the years, was gone. Mom didn't tell me it happened. I found out through a letter from the bank that got sent to my address by mistake. Reading it felt strange. There was no anger, no satisfaction. Just a sense of finality. Not long after, I heard she'd moved into a small rented apartment on the edge of town. For someone like her, it must have felt like the end of the world. She had always been proud of that house. It was her symbol of success, her way of showing others she was better than them. Now, she was in a cramped space with peeling paint and noisy neighbors. For the first time in her life, she couldn't hide behind her image. That's when the calls started. At first, they came every few days. Then, almost every night. Sometimes she cried, apologizing for how she treated me. She'd say things like, "I didn't mean those things, Maddie. I was just under stress." Other times, she'd be angry, accusing me of abandoning her, of being heartless. "You wanted to see me suffer," she'd shout through the phone. I didn't answer any of her calls. I listened to the voicemails sometimes, but I never called back. Every message sounded the same: guilt, anger, denial. I knew she wasn't ready to face the truth. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry for the consequences. During that time, I started therapy. I didn't go because I hated her. I went because I was tired of carrying everything she had done to me. The therapist helped me understand things I'd never put into words before. I learned that what I went through had a name: emotional abuse. The constant criticism, the guilt tripping, the manipulation. It wasn't love, even though it had always been wrapped in the language of family. I learned about boundaries, about saying no without guilt. I learned that I didn't have to keep proving my worth to people who refused to see it. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn my mother's love, but now I understood something simple and painful. Love that has to be earned isn't really love at all. For the first time in years, I started sleeping better. I stopped checking my phone for her messages. I went for walks after work, cooked for myself, and started rebuilding the quiet parts of my life she'd once filled with noise. Mom kept calling for a while, but over time, the messages slowed down. Maybe she realized I wasn't coming back. Maybe she just found someone else to blame. Either way, I didn't feel guilty anymore. I felt free, like I had finally stepped out of a storm that had been raging my whole life. It had been several months since I last heard from my mother. The calls had stopped, and for a while, I almost believed she'd finally moved on. I was doing better, working steadily, keeping to myself, focusing on my own peace. Therapy had helped me find strength I didn't know I had. I had built a small but calm life, one that didn't revolve around her moods anymore. Then one afternoon, as I was leaving a meeting at work, I saw her. She was standing near the reception desk, looking completely out of place. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair unkempt, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. The sight of her there, in my workplace, made my stomach twist. The receptionist tried to ask if I wanted her to call security, but I shook my head. I walked toward my mother slowly, not wanting to make a scene, but my coworkers had already noticed. Everyone was watching. "Maddie," she said, her voice breaking as she reached for me. "Please, I need your help." I kept my hands by my sides. "What's going on?" I asked quietly. "They evicted me," she said, tears spilling down her face. "The landlord said I missed too many payments. I tried, I really did, but I can't do this alone. Please, I have nowhere else to go." I stood there, hearing her words, and all the memories came rushing back. The years of insults, the nights I worked overtime to pay her bills, the way she laughed when people called me lazy. Every cruel word replayed in my mind. People were staring now, pretending not to, but I could feel their eyes on us. She didn't care. She reached out and grabbed my hand, crying harder. "Please, just this once. You're my daughter. You're all I have left." I looked at her hand holding mine, the same hand that had once pointed at me and called me worthless. Slowly, I pulled it away. "I did help you, Mom," I said softly. "For years. You just never noticed because you were too busy tearing me down." She blinked at me, confused, as if she couldn't believe I'd said it. "Maddie, please, you can't mean that. I'm your mother." I met her eyes, calm and steady. "I mean every word." The room was silent. Even my boss, who'd been walking by, stopped for a moment before quietly leaving. My mother's tears slowed, and she looked around, realizing everyone had seen her begging. For someone who lived her life caring about appearances, that moment must have felt unbearable. I turned and started walking toward the elevator. She called my name once, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. As the doors closed, I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from release. For the first time in my life, I had faced her without guilt or hesitation. I had taken back the power she'd stolen from me years ago, and I knew then that I was never going back to being her victim again. Months passed after the day I walked away from my mother at work. Life finally began to feel quiet. I focused on saving money and finding stability. When the time was right, I bought a small townhouse. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. The moment I turned the key in the door for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The house was simple, with light walls and big windows that let the sun pour in. I took my time decorating it piece by piece. I didn't rush or overthink it. Every plant, every picture frame, every soft blanket had a story I chose for myself. There was no guilt attached to any of it, no voice in the background telling me I was selfish or ungrateful. It was the first place in my life that felt safe. Sometimes I would sit on the floor with a cup of tea and just listen to the silence. No arguments, no criticism, just calm. I realized that peace wasn't something people gave you. It was something you built when you stopped letting others destroy it. One evening, as I was watering the plants, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. I hadn't spoken to my brother in months, not since our mother's house was sold. I stared at the screen for a while before opening it. "Hey Maddie," it began. "I owe you an apology." He wrote that he'd finally learned the truth about the mortgage, the bills, everything I had done. He said Mom had been lying for years, pretending she managed everything on her own while taking credit for my sacrifices. He admitted that he'd believed her because it was easier than seeing who she really was. When he called a few days later, his voice was heavy with guilt. "I should have stood up for you," he said. "I just didn't want to believe that Mom could treat you that way." I listened quietly. I could hear the regret in his tone, but I wasn't angry anymore. The pain had already done its work and passed through me. I told him I appreciated his apology and that I forgave him. But when he suggested getting together for dinner, I paused. "I think I need more time," I said gently. "Forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was. I'm just not ready to open that door again." He understood. There was silence for a moment before he said, "I'm proud of you, Maddie. You did what none of us could. You broke free." After we hung up, I sat on the couch and looked around my little home. For the first time, I smiled without feeling guilty. I realized I didn't need a big family or anyone's approval to feel whole. I had built something new out of everything that once broke me. And this time, I wasn't just surviving, I was finally living. A year later, as winter settled in and the first snow began to fall, Madison came home from work to find an envelope in her mailbox. The handwriting on the front was instantly familiar, her mother's. She stood by the door for a long time, the letter in her hands, unsure if she wanted to open it. Part of her wanted to toss it straight into the trash. But curiosity, or maybe closure, made her tear it open. The letter was a mix of apology and blame, the way Sharon had always been. She wrote about how hard things had been, how she never meant to hurt Madison, and how family should stick together. She mentioned her regrets, but also tried to explain them away, saying she was under pressure and didn't realize how much Madison had done. It wasn't the full apology Madison had once dreamed of, but strangely, she didn't feel angry. She didn't cry. She didn't even feel disappointment. When she finished reading, Madison folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer beside a few old photos. She didn't throw it away, but she didn't plan to read it again. It was just a reminder of how far she'd come, and how she no longer needed her mother's approval to feel worthy. As the holidays approached, Madison accepted an invitation from her best friend, Claire, to spend Christmas with her family. They welcomed her with open arms, setting an extra place at the table and treating her like she'd always belonged. There was laughter, warmth, and kindness, the kind of simple love Madison had always wanted but never received growing up. They exchanged gifts by the fireplace, soft music playing in the background. Claire's mom made her favorite dessert after hearing she loved chocolate pie. Her friend's father insisted she join their annual snowball fight in the backyard. For the first time in her life, Madison didn't feel like an outsider or a burden. She felt seen. She felt loved for who she was, not for what she could give or prove. Later that night, as the fire crackled and everyone shared stories, Madison sat quietly for a moment, just watching. She thought about the past, the years of exhaustion, the begging, the guilt. But it didn't hurt anymore. It all felt distant, like a chapter she'd already closed. She realized her revenge had never been about payback. It wasn't about making her mother suffer or feel small. It was about breaking free from the cycle of pain that had ruled her life for so long. Her real victory was this moment. Sitting in a warm home surrounded by genuine laughter, knowing she had built a life her mother couldn't take credit for. As she sipped her cocoa, Claire leaned over and said softly, "You look peaceful." Madison smiled. "I finally am." Her revenge had been quiet, but powerful, living free, living happy, and proving that peace was the greatest answer to cruelty.